Hello there, and welcome to the Al-Attiyah Foundation's podcast series. My name is Ethna Trainer, and today I'm joined by Jeffrey Beyer. He is the Managing Director of Zest Associates. Zest Associates, of course, a sustainability strategist with expertise in climate and energy policy, corporate strategy, green finance, and clean tech innovation. Jeffrey, great to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Edna. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, when we look at solar power, sometimes I often feel it's touted as the reliable energy, renewable energy source in the Middle East, of course, due to the large amount of sunshine, particularly in this region. But is solar power the only potential source of renewable energy available in the Middle East? What do you think, and what are the options that are out there?
You know, solar is a huge opportunity in the Middle East, but we really need to take advantage of all the opportunities that we have. And here in the Middle East, there's more than just solar available. There's some decent wind resources as well, especially in mountainous areas. We've got some good geothermal resources too. So I think it's important to tap all of these. And I mean, looking at geothermal, it actually tends to be quite overlooked in terms of an energy source. I'm not saying it's the best in the world here. It's not like there's volcanoes all over the place like there are in Iceland or Indonesia. But you do have some pretty good hot water, and really it matters in terms of what you use this energy for. And here in the Middle East, a lot of energy is used for desalination, and the kind of heat that you get from the local geothermal is pretty good for desalination. It can also be used for district cooling, which is another big draw on energy. So geothermal is an option. In terms of wind as well. Well, again, it's not the gusty North Sea. There's some decent wind resources here as well. And the interesting thing about wind is actually that it blows harder at nighttime when the sun isn't shining. So there's a good kind of complementarity between solar and wind resources that I think is quite attractive for the Middle East. But you know what, solar is the big one, to be honest. And you don't get much sunnier than this region. So I think solar is going to be the thing that really powers the renewable energy transition here in the region for sure.
Well, without a doubt. And I love what you're saying about wind, because we probably don't think about it too often. But yeah, occasionally catch us in a storm or, you know, in a bit of a wind tunnel, and you really know this can be indeed a very windy area. So that's actually really great to hear in terms of the wind resources. And again, we look at all of the reports that are out there and the increase in energy demand that's going to happen in the years to come. So therefore, I think every source of energy is what everybody is looking for and what we all need to be concentrating on. Talk to me a little bit, though, about hydrogen, and particularly when we look and listen to, you know, what the experts are saying about hydrogen, really a non-CO2 emitting fuel. But can hydrogen become a viable, you know, fuel in the Middle East? You know, it's expensive at the moment, but a lot of focus on it. What do you think?
It's a really exciting development and innovation that's really taken the world by storm. I mean, over the past 18 months, we've seen 25 hydrogen strategies either be released or in production in all kinds of countries around the world. So this is really the fuel du jour that we're seeing really take over. And you know, the devil's in the details here. You really need to understand some of the costs and benefits that go with this. If you're looking at these different colors of hydrogen, you have green hydrogen, which is made from renewable electricity, blue hydrogen made from gas, then all these other fancy colors like turquoise and pink and all kinds of things. But it is a really exciting opportunity. And I think the Middle East has a lot of natural advantages in producing low carbon hydrogen. It has the right kind of inputs. When you're looking at like cheap and abundant renewable electricity, lots of natural gas, has the right geology and infrastructure. So if you want to create blue hydrogen from gas and sequester the carbon underground, it's got the right kind of underground reservoirs to store that carbon. It's got deep sea ports to ship hydrogen ammonia to other markets. It's got the right kind of industries to create a local demand for hydrogen, like chemical manufacturers, and you know, a lot of money in these national energy companies and in sovereign wealth funds. So with the inputs, the geology, infrastructure, industries, capital, it's a really strong combination. And what I think is particularly interesting about this for the region is that there's a lot of opportunity still for innovation in this space, not just around green and blue, but also around some different really low carbon innovative ways to produce hydrogen, something called methane pyrolysis, which actually takes natural gas and uses renewable electricity to split it apart into solid carbon and hydrogen. So you get this black carbon, kind of like a soot that comes out of this process. It's still a bit too expensive to be commercial, but there's a ton of opportunity for innovation. You get around the issue of having to stuff this CO2 under the ground. And it could be, I think, a really big opportunity for the Middle East. In fact, I'm working on a project right now looking at kind of UAE, UK collaboration opportunities around innovation, policy, investment, trade. And we're coming up with some really interesting collaborative opportunities across borders here.
I mean, without a doubt, I think it's a very dynamic time in the energy sector, and there is so much going on. And it's a creative time, I think, for the engineers and the scientists as well. And when we talk about the different colors in hydrogen, I kind of get the feeling from you that you'd be happy to just, encourage people to get started in hydrogen, and then we can all build towards green, because I think that's where everybody wants to go anyway. Is that your belief?
Yeah, in a sense. I mean, everyone does talk about this kind of rainbow panoply of different colors, but I think really what's important for this type of fuel or energy carrier is about the carbon intensity. The whole point of developing a hydrogen economy or replacing certain other fuels with hydrogen is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the color of hydrogen for me is a little bit less relevant than the carbon intensity of that hydrogen. So if it's produced from gas or from nuclear or from renewables, really what is the carbon intensity of that hydrogen? We need to get away from this color coding and towards something that looks at the carbon intensity of hydrogen. And I think that comes around with standardized a regulatory framework around the world so that everybody's measuring and monitoring things in the same way. You have kind of third-party verification, and that's really the next step, I think, in being able to unlock this market globally.
I think, I love the way you talk about this and put it in such, realistic terms, because it is something we have to just get started with. But many people look at some of the challenges involved, perhaps in the transportation of hydrogen, the safety of hydrogen, all of that. And again, talk to me a little bit about, ammonia and methanol as well.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, everyone in the back of their mind has this Hindenburg explosion kind of picture there, which obviously is quite outdated nowadays. Everything explodes, so does petrol. But I think the real challenge around transport, as you said, is about this intermediary. Do you use ammonia or methanol? For me, the question is really less about the chemical intermediary and more about the cost. So how do you get hydrogen from the production center to where it's actually going to be used? And this again is a bit of a numbers game. So if we're looking at by 2050 to get green hydrogen down to say $1 a kilogram, transport costs can add a substantial amount to that production price. So if you're looking at international transport, you can look at like $4 a kilogram transport to get it from the UAE to the UK or to Japan, for example. That adds a lot of uplift in terms of cost. And if you're looking at trucking it in shorter distances, again, it's even more expensive. I think ultimately we may need to turn to pipelines to ship hydrogen. And it seems a bit fantastical to imagine a pipeline going from Saudi Arabia to Europe, 6,000 kilometer pipeline to get this hydrogen from to export markets. But in reality, we're pretty good at building pipelines. The gas pipeline from Russia to Germany is, I think, 12,000 kilometers long. So if we can build that one, I think we can also build a hydrogen pipeline, which is going to be the most cost-effective way of shipping hydrogen in really, really long distances.
And again, that demand is there, and it has to be coming from the source. And the Middle East certainly, considering itself a really good source in terms of like shifting that whole new, energy. But yeah, I'm excited about it. I think everybody else is excited about it, and the possibilities, are endless. We've got engineers and scientists here in the region and indeed around the world, and they're well able to manage all these fuels. They've been doing it for ages. One area, though, and a lot of focus here we're seeing too, is nuclear power. And the UAE really is looking also. They're going to be generating electricity from nuclear without a doubt. Already the plants are operational. But when you look in the long term, can nuclear power be viable? And really looking at the regulation, looking at safety issues, and indeed disposal of nuclear waste, all of that has to be taken into consideration. What do you think?
Yeah, nuclear is an interesting one, and I can argue both sides of the argument pretty well on this one. But you're right. In the UAE, we had the Baraka nuclear plant that went online in April of 2021 this year. The second reactor just went online a few weeks ago, actually. It's got a lot of pros and cons, but I think on balance, the cons tend to outweigh the pros a little bit. Nuclear has the obvious challenge of dealing with radioactive waste, right? There's always that threat of an accidental meltdown, like we saw in Fukushima. I mean, it's a small risk, but it's real. And the real thing is around the cost, right? Nuclear is pretty expensive. It's about 20 to 40% more expensive than wind or solar. It's one of the only types of energy that's gone up in price over the past 25 years rather than coming down in price. And it's pretty slow to go from idea to producing electrons. You're looking at like an 8 or 10-year horizon between signing an agreement and actually producing your first electron from that nuclear power plant. Whereas if you look at wind or solar, you're looking at a 12 to 24-month horizon from an idea on paper to shooting electrons out. So, if we're really looking at nuclear because it's a low carbon option, I think we should look again. We don't have the time to spend looking at 10 years down the road. We need to start reducing emissions today. On the other hand, there are benefits to nuclear. It's predictable, it's reliable, it helps grid operators manage the grid to keep it really stable, keeping system inertia on the grid, for example. So I think the real question, though, if you're looking at that kind of reliability and stability, is about how to make renewables more reliable and predictable. And for me, that's about building kind of grid level energy storage, looking at the other technologies that can provide that, right? Not just batteries, but a whole host of grid level energy storage solutions, connecting countries with neighboring countries to share electricity across borders. So overall, I'd keep existing nuclear power stations running for as long as we can, but I'd hesitate before building a new one today.
Interesting. And again, I mean, I think it comes down to the fact that there is a huge demand for energy. There will be an even bigger demand for energy. And we all really take it for granted, don't we? We take for granted we can turn on the light and it's going to work and that the air conditioning will work and all of that. And of course, we need to bring, a whole population out there, into the energy mix that don't have energy. But one of the areas that could probably conserve energy, so to speak, too, is, energy efficiency. Now, perhaps in this part of the world, nobody has needed to worry about it in the past because of the low price of energy that's been here. But do you think the cost of fuels is going to perhaps have to rise dramatically? Maybe even the concept of taxation, but you have to drive it to sustainable. What's going to get people, particularly in this area, to cut back and to be more efficient with their energy use?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a huge energy efficiency opportunity here in the Gulf. And you mentioned, is the only way to do this by raising prices or taxing energy? Well, that's definitely one way to do it. And you can either raise the price of energy using taxes, or you can actually remove subsidies to make things more expensive. And that would be a first step. The other way to do it is subsidizing energy efficiency improvements. So kind of overcoming this low cost by helping along the efficiency measures. The third way is kind of not a financial thing, but it's really facilitating the market for energy efficiency. So that's like looking at awareness raising opportunities, facilitating energy efficiency companies to come into the market. In my opinion, no government wants to raise the price of energy, Gulf or anywhere, right? Look at France last year, the Gilets jaunes, they shut down the country for a number of years and Macron had a tough time. So no one wants to raise the price of energy, despite it being an effective way to reduce consumption. I personally think the subsidy route is an attractive one, and especially for countries in the Middle East that export energy. And the reason for that is because whenever you save energy in a country that exports energy, a government saves a lot of money, and they save money from avoiding a domestic subsidy cost, for example. That's number one. They save money from being able to export additional energy that wasn't burned at home. That's number two. And they also save money by not having to build new power plants to satisfy this growing demand of energy. So there's kind of three values that governments can save by reducing consumption at home. And in my opinion, if you kind of take that value, what we call like the shadow price of energy efficiency, that could be the value of a subsidy that you put towards improvements. And that subsidy essentially becomes a revenue neutral subsidy for governments in the region. So I think there's really innovative, creative ways to be able to subsidize energy efficiency in a low cost or maybe revenue neutral way. That's especially relevant to countries here in the Middle East that export oil and gas.
I love what you say there, the shadow cost of energy efficiency. And I remember doing a panel actually not too long ago where somebody said that the amount of energy that is there, the numbers, the tonnage and all of that, if we were more efficient, would almost be another source of energy completely.
Absolutely, it's called the first fuel, right? It's the every megawatt you don't use, they call them negawatts, like a negative watt, right? So what's the value of a negawatt, and that's how you can kind of look at this subsidy idea.
And I think, through education, and I know the electricity boards here in the region and the departments are doing their best to make people aware, and they're bringing in smart metering and all of that. So I think that is hopefully going to catch on. But let's have a look now at carbon capture. And an awful lot of effort, of course, been made to really continue, the utilization in the hydrocarbon space for the generation of carbon capture. It seems to have its place. But sometimes the hydrocarbon companies are also just accused, as is this just a way the producers, can avoid stranded assets?
Yeah. I mean, carbon capture. Listen, it's definitely going to play a role in the fight against climate change, no question. Whether it needs to be used to capture carbon from a gas-fired power station or a coal power station, for me, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, fossil fuels are already struggling to compete with renewables. In terms of price. Adding carbon capture and storage to them makes them even more economically unviable. But I think carbon capture, it needs to be developed, and it should really be prioritized for those sectors that are especially hard to decarbonize, like cement making, like steel making, chemical production. I think another really interesting and future-oriented application of CCS is using it to capture carbon that's been taken out of the atmosphere. So we're looking at direct air capture as a way to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, to slow down and ultimately reverse climate change. And I think that's a particularly big opportunity here in the Middle East. And the reason is because there's such inexpensive solar energy, solar electricity, that the cost of direct air capture in the Middle East is going to be particularly low, probably among the lowest in the world. When carbon prices go up, as they are around the world, and the news tightens around how much you can emit, suddenly direct air capture plus CCS starts to be a more economically viable option. It's actually quite a clever loop, for countries in the Middle East, especially if they've managed to earn all this money from exporting oil and gas, then can earn money again by capturing that carbon and putting it underground. Then you've got a pretty good business model there.
Well, I do think there's more, proactive and sincere methods behind what they want to do if we're talking out there. But again, I mean, I do think it will play its role. But I love what you're talking to, in terms of air capture. And I just think the science at the moment in this industry, when we look at the energy sector, it's so exciting in many ways, and it's a really very dynamic time. But talk to me a little bit about what you're doing, with your consulting firm at Zest Associates. One of the areas, of course, is reducing scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So talk to us a little bit more in terms of, your customers when they're coming to you, and how can you advise them to actually reduce scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions? How can producers do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And Zest really focuses on the kind of policy frameworks and strategy around emissions reductions. So we work a lot with governments and government-linked organizations, agencies that are focused on creating those types of frameworks and enabling mechanisms to reduce emissions. I think a big opportunity to reduce emissions is through energy service companies, so-called ESCOs, which are kind of energy efficiency experts that go into buildings. They do an energy audit to assess improvement opportunities. Then they kind of finance those opportunities through their own banks and take a share of the energy savings. It's a really, really elegant way of creating energy efficiency through this intermediary. And we've done a lot of work in Turkey and elsewhere around how to create these ESCO markets, how to facilitate those markets, overcome barriers that ESCOs face. Countries in the UAE actually have organizations like a super ESCO, which is an entity that helps facilitate the market for energy service companies. And they do all kinds of things to overcome barriers that ESCOs face. And it's those kind of frameworks and things that Zest really focuses on developing.
I like that. Elegance in energy through escrows.
There we go.
There, it's got a headline going on here. Lovely words coming into this energy sector, I think, too, when we look at the great opportunities and the possibilities. But one area, of course, that everybody needs to pay attention to is finance. And when it comes to financing sustainability projects, and particularly at a time too when the price of, hydrocarbons is high, what can boost the profitability, for the operators of sustainability projects? What makes it more attractive?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And, I've been studying green finance in the Middle East for the past 6 months through a particular project, looking at all of the financial tools that you can use to mobilize money towards sustainable investments in the Gulf, and also non-financial tools like things like around a sustainability taxonomy, which is like a common language that describes what does green mean, what does social mean, looking at corporate disclosures for sustainability risks and performance, looking at the role of central banks. We've been doing this piece of work with HSBC and the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government here in Dubai. We've also looked at a lot of financial tools like green loans, guarantees, and risk insurance, green bonds, big opportunity around green sukuks. And sukuk is like a Sharia compliant lending instrument, like a bond. But in the Gulf, we've seen a lot of things come to the surface. Green bonds is an excellent way to be able to finance low carbon projects and innovations. In the Gulf, we've also got a lot of opportunities around sovereign wealth funds and state-owned enterprises as well. Sovereign wealth funds can make their portfolios a lot greener by screening their investments for sustainability criteria, and they can also have the flexibility to invest in areas that are strategically important for the country. So not just looking for commercial returns, but also looking for social and environmental returns. And I think that's a big opportunity in the region, because this region has some of the biggest sovereign wealth funds in the world. Related to state-owned enterprises as well, this is just so fascinating. I think it's an amazing statistic, and it's almost hard to believe, but around the world, just 15 state-owned enterprises emit a quarter of the world's emissions. So 15 companies really emit 25% of the world's emissions. So they obviously have a huge role to play in facilitating a low carbon transition and using their size to really change the impact of their operations.
Indeed, I think it makes a huge difference. And when we look at ESG, I think, everybody is talking about it. And just before we close, perhaps I leave you, with this, and if you might just talk to us, when we look at the narrative in this industry and the narrative in the energy industry, how it has changed over, the past 5, the last couple of years here. You and I will attend a lot of energy conferences, and the conversation, without a doubt, I think is very encouraging in terms of we are all heading, in one direction, very much decarbonizing, heading towards green and clean. Are you encouraged when you hear the big oil companies and, everybody else getting involved in this conversation, and not just the conversation, but actually doing something about it?
Yeah, Etna. I've been in the sustainability and climate change space for over 15 years now, and I got to tell you, the last few years have finally, you're seeing that turning point. But I'm also really aware of the science, and the science is pretty nerve-wracking if you really get into the details. We've all seen the recent IPCC reports that say this has to happen now, has to happen faster, and bigger. So I am encouraged by a lot of the noises, the commitments, the net zero obligations, and the interest of countries moving to an energy transition. I think in the Middle East, there's really two ways to go, right? You can have a limited engagement with a low carbon future, kind of do a business as usual approach, and put your country and your economy at a lot of risk through carbon taxes and border adjustments in Europe and elsewhere. Demand shocks hammering national budgets. You can have an instability in financial markets which are overexposed to these high carbon assets. Or you can really see the writing on the wall and capitalize on all these low carbon opportunities that we see, especially in the region. Become a global powerhouse for low carbon energy. We can develop new resources like green and blue hydrogen, use these huge capital reserves and ingenuity around innovation to reorient economies towards a sustainable low carbon future. I think this is a real fork in the moment for the whole world, but also for really countries here in the Middle East. Climate change isn't going away. We've all woken up to the need for this low carbon future. And countries in the Middle East have this incredible opportunity to be creative and really capitalize on a different but very, very exciting future.
Indeed, they do. And I think we are certainly hearing, we're hearing the right language there. We're seeing strong commitments, and, they get stronger. And as we look, towards COP26 and the involvement of everybody here in the Middle East too. I mean, I think that's what's so exciting. But we do have to wrap it up there. I mean, without a doubt, we need to see more sustainability. We need to see it faster. We need to see people, working together on this, because ultimately I do believe that's the direction we're all heading to. Jeffrey Beyer, Managing Director of Zest Associates. Thank you so much, Jeffrey.
Thank you. Thanks.
So this has been the Al-Attiyah Foundation's podcast, part of our ongoing series. We will have many more. So keep an eye on this space, because we'll be back very, very shortly with more updates in terms of what's happening in the energy market around the region here and indeed around the world. I'm Etna Trainer. From me and from all of the team, thank you so much. Bye-bye.